When I had a few moments with the Prime Minister, I felt it was such a great honor for him not only to respect, the words of his father, let alone the legacies that we've left behind ever since Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow has been around, let alone the commitment to government relationships that we do have the privilege of honoring, but also facilitating and honing for the next generations, and honor not only for the significance of our next generation, I should say, but also for the people of today. So we'll start our evening off with an opening prayer, and I would just like to honor and ask Corey, along with Matsanama, to come up and lead us in opening prayer this afternoon. Chish.
Dancheda Juan Ainji Matsasanama Uye Agunda Iche Dakwakara Dan Kochaniche Guancho Kwanlin Uninje
Dancheda Juan Ainji Uye Kajat Iche Kwanlin Yu Quidling Ye Ninje Kwanlin Dan Iche Shanitan.
So Akanke Kakwadunje Hen Ujanhe. I'm going to be singing a prayer song, and this song is composed by Linda Harvey. And so if I just make sure they're standing, please. Ahi-ya hey, ahi-ya hey, ahi-ya hey, ah. Ahi-ya hey, ahi-ya hey, ahi-ya hey, ah. Cleo Shothan, Data Yatai Nanje. Cleo Shothan, Data Yatai Nanje. Ahi-ya hey, ahi-ya hey, ahi-ya hey, ah. Ahi-ya hey, ahi-ya hey, ahi-ya hey, ah. Shonithan, Datayat Ainanje. Shonithan, Datayat Ainanje. Ahi-ya hey, ahi-ya hey, ahi-ya hey, ah. Ahi-ya hey, ahi-ya hey, ahi-ya hey, ah. Ahi-ya hey, ah.
Gnashish, Dikiang Ho, Nra Shonithan Ut Aquiding Che, Ma Janada Ke Nla Ukai Nanje, Ma Mat En Nanje, Dak Aning Taje, Ayat Mat So Than, Dak Ading Jije, Nana Swa Hlu Shashit O, Dak Aning Taje, So Than Rana Ye Nishon, Dad Dunana Shashit O, Sho Than Rana Ye, Sho Than Rakenu Dan Nishon. Da Sho Shashit O, Dak Aning Taje. Dat Ananji, So Than Nshla Nat Do. Ayat Chu Kwaningling Ganashish Ayat Do. Chu Kwanashish Do. Ma Ajuyanji Jungtung Nshla Nat Ut Ananji. Dat Ananji, So Than Rakenu Dan Nishon. Dat Ananji, Dayanji, Dakinger, Danetching, Nu Sat No, Shaunithan ut aquidinche conaschish de kiankau conaschish tlanghon quache.
Just like to personally thank Matsanama and Corey for the opening prayer this morning and for the Prime Minister's consideration. We invested in our youth through our language program in order to not only give our language back to our next generation, but this is just a little bit of a product of when you invest back into your community when it comes to language, and the results speak for themselves. So just once again would like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. It's a very important, obviously, occasion for us as Yukon First Nations. The pivotal journey that our people took almost 50 years ago on February 14th not only changed the way we look at politics and how we as First Nation people are looked upon in the territory, but 50 years later, we are now taking our rightful place back in our communities, back in the territory, and back in this country. I'd also like to thank the Prime Minister for his dedication not only to Indigenous people across the land, because without the political will, as we've very much known for over 50 years, through the good days and the bad, without the political will and the support for First Nation and Indigenous people in this country, we will not have a chance. So it's very important that we not only honor the agreements that we signed many years ago in 1993 on May 29th, but more importantly that we look towards tomorrow with not only vision, but inspiration for especially the next generation. We now have the opportunity not only to provide that education to our next generation, to our youth, but also have the ability now to share our culture and our language and our ways in doing with our next generation in openness, loving, kindness, and all the things that we once passed on for thousands and thousands of years. So it is a great honor for me now to call up our Prime Minister and once again thank him very much for this opportunity, not only to be here to help celebrate with us today, but equally as important, be amongst our people and celebrate with our communities as well. So without further ado, I'll introduce our Prime Minister, Glunchish.
Thank you. Good evening. It is so great to be here, joined by Minister Patty Haidu and Member of Parliament for Yukon, your Member of Parliament, Brendan Hanley. Brendan, good to have you here. I want to thank the Council of Yukon First Nations and, of course, Grand Chief Peter Johnson for having me here tonight. It was wonderful and important for me to be able to come here to the Yukon tonight, and somewhat fitting because 50 years ago, you came to visit my father in Ottawa. You came for a historic meeting about self-governance with this document, Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow. And the importance of that gesture, which led to the successful negotiation of modern treaties, goes so far beyond what you accomplished here for Yukon. It set the path for so much of what we refer to as reconciliation today. The idea of partnership, of shared stewardship, grounded in respect for people who have been on this land from time immemorial. The understanding that there is a better way forward than the colonial structures that have defined this country for so long. This was 50 years ago. This started, and it started with some of you in this room, but mostly with your parents and the elders who were around then. And that vision that they had shapes not just the Yukon, but it shapes our whole country. That meeting helped lay the foundations for modern treaties that have benefited First Nations right across the country. 5 decades later, modern treaties have provided Indigenous ownership of 600,000 square kilometers of land. That's about the size of Manitoba. Capital transfers of about $3.2 billion. Participation in land and resource management decisions. Self-government rights and political recognition. And of course, protection of traditional ways of life. When we talk about, and it was wonderful to hear you, Peter, talking about language and how important that is. We know that the best way to ensure that young people are filled with the proper pride in who they are and where they come from, of their connection to this land that goes back millennia, is to make sure that they are brought up in their culture, in their traditions, and especially in their language. I'm a Quebecer. You don't have to tell me about the importance of language as a vehicle of identity. And the strengthening and the signs of flourishing language is for me a huge indication that we are on the right track. And yes, there's a lot more work to do for this government, for all of you, as we work together on the recognition of rights and the movement towards self-government with Indigenous peoples across Canada. But what this anniversary shows here for First Nations in Yukon is that we can get there, and not just here, but everywhere. The policy paper laid out in the principles of this agreement was called Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow. And that title is particularly worth mentioning because not only am I here as the son of the Prime Minister of the time it was drafted, but Grand Chief Peter's father, Sam Johnston, was one of the chiefs that came to Ottawa. And today, just to make sure the circles are circles upon circles, I'm glad to be here with my son Hadrian, so he can understand the impact that his grandfather helped have. Hopefully see a little bit of the impact that his father's having, but understand that there's lots more work for all of us to do for future generations as well, because this work isn't done. But marking this milestone is important. I was speaking with Patty earlier about the fact that the news is filled, rightly so, with the challenges and tragedies that are hitting in First Nations communities, Indigenous communities across this country because of intergenerational trauma, decades of colonial structures. And rightly, as Canadians, we should all be paying attention to those. But we have to tell the success stories as well. We have to celebrate those things that are working well. And not waiting for them to be all perfect before we highlight them, but saying, no, there's good work being done. And particularly when that good work has been so consistently driven by First Nations themselves, as the work that has been done here in the Yukon over the past 50 years. Yes, federal governments have had their role to play, and territorial governments as well. But it has been First Nations here in the Yukon that have truly driven this process. Set the stage, set the bar, set the example for so many communities right across the country. So being here today, yes, is about celebrating this moment in the history of Yukon and in the future of Yukon. But it's also about highlighting this moment as a part of the history of the country and impacting all Canadians, Indigenous and non-Indigenous. On sait qu'il reste encore beaucoup de travail à faire sur le chemin de la réconciliation, maintenant et pour les prochaines générations, mais notre gouvernement est déterminé à poursuivre ces efforts avec vous tous. We must continue our work so that the next generation and the generation after that and the one after that can continue to heal and understand that everyone is worthy of honor, respect, and shared stewardship of the present and future of this country. The work of reconciliation takes time. There are generations of colonialism that we have to undo. But our government remains committed to walking the path of reconciliation with First Nations and all Indigenous peoples in Canada for as long as it takes. Thank you all. Guan Alshish, Shoniton, Masicho. Merci beaucoup.
Just also like to recognize Chief Smith and Rick, who also were, their parents were on the Hill that day along with your father. And just also want to recognize your son Hadrian for his commitment and sacrifice also to not only your success, but also for our country, all the sacrifices that he takes on a daily basis as well. So we have a little present, a little token of our appreciation today, and this comes from our archives. So it's something that most probably people in this room haven't had a chance to see, let alone yourself. And it's a moment in our history, but it was captured in Old Crow in the early 70s, and it's a picture of your father and your brother on a playground in Old Crow. So it's a little bit of what we can pass on back to you. So.
It's your grandpa pushing Uncle Sash in a swing, so it's great.
He's got quite the expression too, right?
He really does.
So it's dinner now? Okay, so what we're going to do now is invite the leadership, the respective chiefs, to come up and do a group photo in front of the stage here, and then we will begin our dinner. And we just love to thank our caterers, First Nation-owned business Takini River Ranch, for providing the beautiful dinner tonight for us as well. So.